The archives of the former USSR contain documents that could overturn our understanding of the history of this great power. Secret maps with mysterious markings, diagrams of underground storage facilities, encrypted coordinates. All these are traces of a grandiose system of hiding places created to preserve national treasures. Gold, currency, jewels, and perhaps something even more valuable still await their moment in hidden caches. Who created these treasure maps? What exactly is hidden in them? And most importantly, where are these caches located today? Subscribe to the channel and like the video so you don't miss new investigations into the most mysterious secrets of history. And tell us in the comments, do you think the modern state has a right to the treasures hidden by the Soviet authorities? Or should these riches belong to those who find them? In the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union finally disappeared from the political map of the world, strange rumors began to surface in various parts of Russia and the former Soviet republics. People talked about forgotten safes, buried chests, and even entire caches of gold bars left over from the days of the mighty empire. But where could they have come from? They began to search for answers in the archives, where they discovered some very curious documents. Among the yellowed folders, stored for decades under the label Top Secret, researchers found maps and diagrams traced with thick pencil lines. They marked forests, old buildings, mines, and dilapidated monastery cellars. The question that immediately arose was, why did a state that preached strict centralization need such hiding places? History provides many examples of such behavior. Great powers have always sought to protect their wealth. However, the peculiarity of the Soviet materials was that the maps did not show the usual warehouses or well-guarded bank vaults. They indicated places that were virtually impossible to reach without special training. Dense forests, swampy plains, 600 kilometers from the nearest cities. According to the documents, this is where the resources were taken. And here, the main question arises. Were these really strategic reserves, or were they hidden plans of the state leadership? Let's take a closer look at one of the first cases of such documents being discovered. In the early 2000s, an amateur researcher in the Pskov region stumbled upon a diagram in an archive that had been drawn in the late 1930s. On it, a military engineer had marked hills and symbols resembling entrances to stone workings. An archival note next to it read, "To be used during evacuation." The idea of gold reserves immediately came to mind, because it was during these years that Moscow was preparing for a major war and considering options for preserving strategic resources. The diagram essentially had all the features of a classic treasure map. But why did such materials remain almost untouched in the archives? A significant portion of the documents, even those that have been declassified, remain semi-legendary to this day. Some experts believe that there were no real treasures in the caches, but rather ordinary reserve warehouses of weapons or food created for the needs of the Red Army. Others point out that it is too suspicious that the instructions specifically mention precious metals and currency funds. Such wording could not have appeared by accident. So what exactly were the Soviet leaders trying to hide? Gold, weapons, or something even more valuable? Rumors grew stronger as new publications appeared. Newspaper and magazine authors claimed that the maps were not just storage diagrams, but part of an entire system. Allegedly, a large-scale plan was being developed to distribute wealth in case the state was on the verge of destruction. This was consistent with the logic of the time. In an era when the threat of invasion seemed very real, people sought to keep their valuables as far away as possible from potential invaders. That is why many researchers point out that this issue has not only economic, but also deeply political implications. The desire to preserve what can ensure the life of the state is an understandable measure. But why does the word treasures appear so often in the documents? Where does this terminology come from, which is much more suited to ancient treasure hunters than strict party officials? The answer to this question can only be found by looking deeper into the archives and examining each document individually. After all, what we have before us is not just a map. It is a mystery that connects the economy, politics, and secret decisions of the Soviet authorities. That is why, in order to get closer to the solution, we need to find out how these mysterious treasure troves of wealth were created, and who had the right to dispose of them. The concept of strategic reserves had a very special meaning in the Soviet Union. Unlike Western countries, where gold reserves were stored in the famous underground vaults of central banks, the Soviet system was fundamentally different. It was not just warehouses that were created, but entire treasure troves scattered throughout the vast country. This concept did not come out of nowhere. It was the result of a thorough analysis of historical experience and an understanding of the vulnerability of centralized storage facilities. The first mentions of the creation of such a system date back to the mid-1920s. It was then that the leadership of the young state realized that relying solely on traditional methods of storing valuables was extremely dangerous. The revolution showed how quickly the old system could collapse, and the Civil War demonstrated that enemies could appear from any side. But was it really just about protection from external threats, or did the party leadership have deeper considerations? Archival documents show that the Soviet system of secret storage facilities was built on the principle of maximum dispersion. Gold bars, precious stones, currency reserves, and even particularly important documents were distributed among dozens of locations. The geography was truly impressive. From the forests of Karelia to the mountain gorges of the Caucasus, from the Siberian taiga to the steppes of Kazakhstan. The locations were chosen not only for their inaccessibility, but also for the possibility of quick evacuation if necessary. The instructions for creating these storage rooms are particularly interesting. They described in detail what the containers should look like, what depth was optimal for burial, and what materials should be used to protect against moisture and corrosion. The documents required the use of lead boxes treated with special compounds, as well as the creation of a double protection system, external and internal. Judging by the technical requirements, it was planned that the treasures would remain underground for decades. It turns out that as early as the 1920s, the Soviet leadership was preparing for a long-term crisis. But what kind? No less mysterious is the information about who was responsible for creating and guarding these hiding places. According to documents, this work was entrusted not to ordinary military personnel or security officers, but to specially selected individuals who had undergone special screening. They were called trusted persons for special assignments. These individuals received maps, keys, and even special passwords that would allow them to access the hidden treasures at a critical moment. The list of such persons was extremely limited and was kept personally by top-level officials. Interestingly, the system was constantly evolving and improving. While in the 1920s it was mainly about gold and currency, by the 1930s industrial secrets, blueprints of important inventions, and even samples of rare materials were added. And at the end of the 1930s, on the eve of the Great War, Entire archives of documents that could be useful for rebuilding the state from scratch began to be placed in hiding places. But why were the authorities so seriously preparing for a scenario of complete collapse? Did they know more about the coming trials than is commonly believed? The security system for these storerooms is impressive in its sophistication. Each hiding place had not only basic protection, but also false entrances, emergency exits, and even special traps for uninvited guests. Documents mention that some particularly important storage facilities were equipped with systems that would destroy the contents in the event of an unauthorized attempt to open them. All this suggests that the creators of the system considered a wide variety of threats, from ordinary robbers to organized groups that might try to seize Soviet treasures. The paperwork related to the hiding places was also very cleverly arranged. There were several copies of the maps, but none of them contained complete information. To obtain the exact coordinates, it was necessary to combine data from different sources, which were stored in different places and by different people. Such a protection system raises the question, what if these maps contain information not only about state reserves, but also about the personal wealth of the party leadership? To understand the logic behind the creation of Soviet hiding places, it is necessary to delve into the political situation of those years. From the moment of its birth, the young state of workers and peasants found itself surrounded by hostile forces. The intervention of 14 states, civil war, and constant threats of new invasions all shaped the leadership's particular mindset. But it was not just about external enemies. Within the country, there were also those who dreamed of a return to the old order. In such an environment, the idea of dispersing wealth seemed not only reasonable, but vitally necessary. However, analysis of archival materials shows that the motives for creating caches were much more complex than simple protection from enemies. Many documents contain phrases about preserving revolutionary achievements for future generations and ensuring the possibility of restoring the socialist system in the event of temporary setbacks. Such wording gives pause for thought. Did the EDE party leadership allow for the possibility of a temporary defeat of socialism? And if so, what exactly was planned to be hidden in the caches? Simply material values, or the foundations for the revival of an entire ideology? Particular attention is drawn to the fact that the system of hiding places was created in parallel with the formation of Soviet intelligence and counterintelligence. Many of those who were involved in organizing secret storage facilities later became key figures in the state security agencies. This is no coincidence. The creation and protection of caches required precisely those skills that later proved useful in intelligence work: the ability to act covertly, create legends, and work with secret documents. All of this was necessary for the organization of storage rooms. Interesting details can be found in the memoirs of some of those involved in those events. They describe how people were selected to work with the hiding places. Candidates were checked not only for political reliability, but also for psychological stability. It was important to find people who were capable of keeping secrets even under torture, as well as having an excellent memory and sense of direction. But why were the requirements so strict? Were the authorities seriously preparing for the possibility that their agents could fall into the hands of the enemy and be interrogated? The technical side of creating hiding places also deserves attention. The archives contain detailed instructions on choosing a location, preparing the ground, creating waterproofing, and camouflaging entrances. Particular attention was paid to ensuring that the burial site looked natural and would not attract attention even after many years. It was recommended to choose areas that were unlikely to be actively developed: swampy lowlands, rocky slopes, and dense forests. Interestingly, the instructions provided for the creation of not only main hiding places, but also false ones. For each real cache, there were several fake ones, which either contained nothing at all or only items of little value. This system was designed to confuse potential treasure hunters and send them on a wild goose chase. It turns out that the creators of the treasure maps planned to spread misinformation in advance. But who exactly were they trying to hide the truth from? The geography of the hiding places also had its own logic. Preference was given to territories that could remain in the Soviet rear in the event of an enemy invasion. This explains why many storage facilities were created in Siberia and the Far East, regions that would be extremely difficult for the enemy to reach. At the same time, however, some of the caches were located in the European part of the country, sometimes quite close to the borders. This location suggests that some of the caches may have been planned for completely different purposes. For example, to finance underground work in the occupied territories. The cache management system was built on the principle of strict hierarchy. At the very top was a small circle of party leaders who knew about the existence of the entire network. Below them were regional officials, each of whom had information only about their caches. Finally, at the very bottom were the executors, those who directly created the caches but did not know their exact contents or the overall picture of the system. The Great Patriotic War was a real test for the Soviet cache system. It was during these years that the entire concept of dispersed storage of national wealth was put to the test. When German tanks approached Moscow and the enemy captured vast territories, the decision to create secret storage rooms proved to be truly prophetic. But the war years not only confirmed the correctness of the chosen strategy, they forced it to be radically revised and expanded. The evacuation of state reserves began in the first days of the war. According to archival data, more than 800 tons of gold, several thousand kilograms of platinum, and colossal reserves of precious stones were taken out of Moscow's storage facilities alone. But that was only the beginning. Parallel to the evacuation of industrial enterprises, special trains with cargo of special importance were also moving eastward. Officially, their contents were not disclosed even to military district commanders. But what exactly was being transported in these trains under such secrecy? Only state reserves or something more mysterious? Documents show that the war forced the creation of a completely new category of hiding places: evacuation caches. Unlike pre-war storage facilities, which were designed for long-term storage, these were created in a hurry, often in conditions of an approaching front. Their task was simpler: to preserve valuables until the territory was liberated or until they could be further evacuated. But it was this category of hiding places that later became the source of many legends and search expeditions. The events of the fall of 1941 were particularly dramatic, as the enemy rapidly approached the capital. According to eyewitness accounts, trucks left the Kremlin at night under heavy guard. Local residents reported strange activities in the Moscow suburbs, where groups of people in military uniforms were burying something in the forests. There were no official reports about these operations, but could they have been related to the creation of reserve storage facilities in case Moscow was surrendered? The system of managing secret storage facilities underwent serious changes during the war. Previously, all information was concentrated in Moscow, but now it was necessary to create duplicate control centers. According to some sources, complete maps of all storage facilities were transferred to Koibayshev, Sverdlovsk, and even Tashkent. This meant that in the event of the capital's capture, the cache system could continue to function under the control of backup centers. Interesting details are contained in the memoirs of employees of the evacuated people's commissariats. They recall special trains that ran on a special schedule and made long stops in the most unexpected places. During such stops, part of the cargo was unloaded and disappeared, accompanied by people in plain clothes. Was a chain of intermediate hiding places created in this way to support underground work in the occupied territories? The war also gave rise to a new type of document related to hiding places. These were not just maps, but entire instructions for organizing resistance in the occupied territories. They described in detail where and how partisans could obtain funding, weapons, and necessary materials. Some of these caches were created in advance, in preparation for a possible occupation. Others were formed during the retreat of Soviet troops. A special category was made up of hiding places intended for the preservation of cultural treasures. Not only well-known masterpieces were evacuated from museums and libraries, but also secret collections, the existence of which was known only to a few. Among them were ancient manuscripts, archaeological finds, and even documents related to Russia's pre-Soviet history. But why did these materials require such secrecy? Did they contain information that could undermine the official version of history? As the occupied territories were liberated, the process of returning the hidden treasures began. However, not all of the hiding places were found. The war had thrown the accounting system into chaos, and many of those responsible had died before they could pass on information about the location of the caches. As a result, a significant portion of the military caches became truly lost treasures, the search for which continues to this day. After the war, the Soviet cache system was not only not eliminated, but underwent further development. The onset of the Cold War brought completely different challenges that required a rethinking of the entire concept of hidden storage of strategic resources. Now the main enemy was no longer tank armadas, which could be stopped at certain lines, but nuclear missiles capable of destroying any centralized storage facilities in a matter of minutes. In this situation, treasure maps took on a new, even more important meaning. A small circle of people from Stalin's inner circle played a key role in the development of the post-war system of hiding places. According to archival data, no more than 20 people in the entire Soviet Union had access to the maps. Among them were not only high-ranking party officials, but also heads of security agencies, military commanders, and even several scientists involved in strategic planning. But why was the circle of initiates so small? Were there really people even among the top party leadership who were not trusted with such secrets? So-called personal assignments occupied a special place in this system. Documents show that some maps were handed over to specific individuals with instructions to use them only in extreme situations. The recipients of such assignments had to personally sign for receipt and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Even they did not know the full picture. Each had information about only one or several hiding places, the locations of which were kept strictly secret. Interesting details are contained in the memoirs of one of the state security leaders of those years. He recounts how the briefings for trusted individuals took place. The meetings took place in an atmosphere of strict secrecy, often in dachas or specially equipped conspiratorial apartments. Participants received not only maps, but also detailed instructions on exactly when they could use the treasures entrusted to them. It seems that these were not just state reserves, but funds for some special operations. But what kind? Archival materials show that in the post-war years, the geography of the hiding places expanded significantly. Whereas previously the main focus was on the territory of the USSR, now caches began to be created in friendly socialist countries. According to some sources, such storage facilities were organized in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and even North Korea. This made it possible to finance Soviet influence in these regions, even in the event of a breakdown in official relations. The technical equipment of the caches also underwent significant changes. Sealed containers capable of withstanding radioactive contamination appeared, as did communication systems that allowed signals to be received from the center, and even automatic devices that destroyed the contents of the cache in case of unauthorized opening. This level of technical complexity raises the question, were some of the caches intended to store not only gold and currency, but also very special materials? A special category was made up of maps intended for the leaders of individual regions. Each first secretary of the regional party committee received information about the caches located in his region or republic. However, access to these treasures was subject to a number of conditions. Not only was personal permission from Moscow required, but also confirmation from at least 2 other trusted persons who had to attest to the criticality of the situation. The system for protecting information about the caches is striking in its sophistication. There were several versions of the maps, and to obtain the exact coordinates, it was necessary to combine data from different sources. Moreover, restashes were carried out periodically. The contents of the caches were moved to new locations, and the old maps were destroyed. Such precautions make one wonder, who exactly were the creators of the system protecting themselves from? Did they really suspect betrayal among their most trusted people? Interesting details can be found in documents on the preparation of reserve leadership personnel in case of nuclear war. It turns out that personal cache cards were also prepared for each of the potential understudies of senior party and state officials. This meant that even if the entire top leadership of the country were destroyed, the new leaders would have access to the resources necessary to restore the state. But was there a plan to pass on to the successors not only material resources, but also some special information that could radically change the course of history? Among all the mysteries associated with Soviet treasure maps, the concept of underground tunnels and military storage facilities occupies a special place. This topic is shrouded in so many rumors and legends that it is sometimes difficult to separate fact from fiction. However, archival documents confirm that there was indeed an extensive network of underground structures, some of which were intended specifically for the storage of strategic resources. But the scale of this system remains a mystery to this day. How many kilometers of tunnels were laid under Soviet cities, and what exactly was stored in them? The first mentions of serious underground work date back to the late 1920s. It was then that large-scale work began on the construction of the Moscow metro. However, many researchers claim that, in parallel with the official stations, secret facilities were also created, the existence of which was known only to a few. These claims are supported by the strange features of some sections of the Moscow metro, where the tunnels go much deeper than transport logic requires. Documents related to the Metro 2 project are particularly interesting. Officially, such a project never existed, but declassified FSB archives contain indirect references to an additional transport system for special needs. According to some versions, the idea was to create an underground network that would connect key government facilities and allow the country's leadership to be quickly evacuated if necessary. But weren't these same tunnels used to transport and store treasures from state reserves? The memoirs of the builders of those years contain curious details. They say that when laying some tunnels, special branches were created, which were then carefully camouflaged. The workers involved in this work signed non-disclosure agreements and received higher wages. After the project was completed, many of them were transferred to work in remote regions or even sent to serve in the army. Such precautions suggest the idea: what if real underground storerooms were created in these secret branches? The geography of underground work was not limited to Moscow. Similar projects were implemented in Leningrad, Kiev, Kharkov, and other large cities. The work in Sverdlovsk was particularly large-scale, where an entire underground complex was built under the guise of creating industrial facilities. According to some sources, the total length of the tunnels in this city exceeded 100 kilometers, and a significant part of them was not officially recorded anywhere. The technical complexity of the underground storage facilities is astonishing. The archives contain drawings of ventilation, drainage, and even autonomous power supply systems. The infrastructure was designed for long-term operation in complete isolation from the outside world. But why were such complex systems needed for simple gold storage? Was there a plan to use the underground complexes to house people or top-secret equipment? Interesting details are contained in the memoirs of one of the engineers who participated in the underground work in the 1950s. He recalls that in some tunnels, special chambers with enhanced radiation protection were created. Officially, this was explained as preparation for a possible nuclear war. But the engineer noticed a strange feature. These chambers were equipped not to protect people, but to store certain materials. Could this be related to attempts to create underground storage facilities for particularly dangerous substances or secret developments? The security system for underground facilities also deserves attention. Unlike ordinary military warehouses, access to underground storage facilities was controlled by special units that reported directly to Central Command. Guards underwent special training and signed a lifetime non-disclosure agreement. After completing their service, many of them were given apartments in remote cities and jobs unrelated to their previous duties. Such precautions suggest that the underground storage facilities contained something much more valuable and dangerous than ordinary material wealth. Legends about the party's gold occupy a special place in the mythology of Soviet hiding places. These stories have been passed down by word of mouth for several decades, accumulating new details and speculation. But behind the fantastic tales of untold treasures lie very real facts that make us seriously wonder what kind of riches the party leaders could have accumulated for their personal needs. And the main question, if such caches really existed, where could they be today? The first mentions of the personal treasures of the party elite appeared as early as the 1930s. It was then that it became fashionable among senior party officials to collect works of art, antiques, and even jewelry confiscated from their former owners during the Revolution. Officially, all this was considered national property. But in practice, many valuables ended up in the personal collections of leaders. But what happened to these treasures when their owners fell out of favor? Were they simply confiscated, or were they hidden in secret storage facilities? Archival documents contain intriguing hints about the existence of a special category of hiding places that were created not for state needs, but to ensure the safety of leading comrades. Between the lines of these formulations, one can read that these were personal insurance funds for party leaders. Such a practice was quite logical in the context of constant political change, when today's comrade-in-arms could turn out to be an enemy of the people tomorrow. Particularly interesting are the testimonies about the activities of the so-called economic managers, people who were officially engaged in providing for the daily needs of senior party officials, but in fact performed much more complex functions. According to some sources, they were responsible for creating and replenishing their patrons' personal stashes. These people had unique information about the location of the treasures, but what happened to them after the death or arrest of their patrons? Contemporary accounts contain vivid descriptions of the wealth that surrounded Soviet leaders. Gold tableware, rare paintings, collections of precious stones, antique furniture. All of this officially belonged to the state, but in fact was for the personal use of the party elite. It is logical to assume that the most valuable items were hidden in safe places in case of danger. And if we accept this version, it turns out that somewhere, treasures belonging to the most influential people in the Soviet Union may still be lying around. Intriguing details can be found in the materials of the investigation cases of the Heao 1930s. When arresting high-ranking party officials, investigators sometimes found maps and diagrams that were clearly not related to their official duties. The search reports mention maps of the area with special markings and encrypted coordinate records. But what exactly did these mysterious documents mean? Were they maps of the arrested person's personal hiding places? Legends associated with the duchess and residences of party leaders constitute a special category. According to local residents, excavation work was regularly carried out in the vicinity of such places, and it was not ordinary workers who participated in it, but special brigades under the protection of state security officers. After the work was completed, the sites were carefully camouflaged, and witnesses were given strict warnings not to disclose anything. Were hiding places with the personal wealth of influential party members created in this way? Judging by indirect data, the technology for creating personal hiding places differed little from that used for state hiding places. The same lead containers, the same methods of protection against moisture and corrosion, and the same principles of camouflage were used. But there was one important difference. Only the creator of the personal hiding places had access to them, and at most, one or two trusted people from their immediate circle. This means that after the owner's death, information about the location of the treasures could be buried with him forever. Modern researchers have identified several of the most likely places where the party elite could have created personal hiding places. These are the areas surrounding government dakhas, closed sanatoriums, and forest areas near the mansions of senior party officials. Many of these places remain largely unexplored, raising hopes for sensational discoveries. But is modern society ready for such secrets to be revealed? The role of the KGB in the Soviet treasure map system is one of the most secretive and intriguing pages in this history. The Committee for State Security not only guarded the hiding places, but also actively participated in their creation, development, and use. Moreover, there are good reasons to believe that the KGB itself had its own network of secret storage facilities intended for special operations and independent of the main state system. But what specific tasks were accomplished with the help of these special hiding places, and who had the right to dispose of them? Archival documents show that as early as the late 1940s, a special unit was created within the state security structure that dealt exclusively with strategic reserves. Officially, it was called the Special Operations Department, but employees simply referred to it as the Cash Department. Its staff included not only experienced chekists, but also engineers, geologists, chemists, and even archaeologists. Such a wide range of specialists suggests that the department may have been involved in creating hiding places for storing not only money, but also some kind of special materials. Interesting details can be found in the memoirs of a former KGB employee, published in the late 1990s. He recounts that there was a strict hierarchy of access to information about the caches. At the lowest level were ordinary operatives who knew about the existence of the system but did not have specific information. Above them were regional leaders, each of whom had access only to information about caches in their own territory. Finally, only a few people from the committee's top leadership had the full picture. A special category was made up of so-called operational caches. Unlike long-term state storage facilities, these were created to solve current intelligence and counterintelligence tasks. They did not store gold and jewels, but rather currency for financing agent work, documents for legalizing employees, special equipment, and even samples of foreign goods needed to create legends. But why were such secret caches needed for these purposes? Were operations being planned that even the highest party leadership was not supposed to know about? Documents confirm that the KGB had the right to create caches not only on the territory of the USSR, but also in foreign countries. Such caches were mainly located in socialist countries, but there is evidence that they also existed in capitalist countries where Soviet intelligence operated. This information opens a completely new page in the history of the Cold War. It turns out that there was a network of Soviet caches scattered all over the world. The technical equipment of the KGB's caches was significantly superior to that of ordinary state storage facilities. The most modern means of protection were used, including radio-electronic alarm systems, automatic devices for destroying the contents, and even chemical traps for uninvited visitors. Some caches were equipped with remote monitoring devices, which made it possible to check their condition without approaching the storage site. Such technical complexity suggests that the KGB caches stored something so important that its protection justified any expense. Intriguing information is contained in documents on the reorganization of the KGB in the last years of the USSR. It turns out that many employees of the secret department were transferred to commercial structures or even dismissed with the right to travel abroad. Was this an attempt to privatize some of the information about the caches, to transfer it from state ownership to private hands? The fate of the archives related to the KGB's activities in the field of caches is of particular interest. After the collapse of the USSR, a significant part of the documents were either destroyed or transferred to the new special services under the strictest secrecy. However, some materials, according to rumors, fell into private hands and were even sold to foreign collectors. If these rumors are true, then somewhere in the world there may be authentic maps of Soviet treasures, including those that belong to the KGB itself. Modern researchers note a strange feature. Many former KGB employees who were involved with the caches unexpectedly became wealthy after retirement. Officially, this was explained by successful entrepreneurial activity. But skeptics offer another version. Did these people use their knowledge of the location of secret caches for personal gain? Analyzing the likely locations of Soviet caches, researchers identify several main categories of territories that, for various reasons, could have attracted the attention of the organizers of secret caches. The geography of potential storage sites is striking in its diversity, from Arctic islands to the deserts of Central Asia, from the remote forests of Karelia to the mountain gorges of the Caucasus. Each region had its own characteristics that made it suitable for a certain type of cache. But was there any common logic in the choice of locations, or was each storage facility created based on specific circumstances? The northern territories of the USSR were of particular interest to the creators of the caches. The harsh climate, minimal population density, and inaccessibility made these places ideal for long-term storage. The islands in the White and Barents Seas were particularly attractive, as the natural conditions ensured the natural preservation of the hidden materials. According to some sources, it was in the northern archipelagos that the largest strategic caches were created, intended to ensure the restoration of the state after a global catastrophe. Industrial regions were also considered promising locations for hiding places. The Urals, Kuzbas, Donetsk Basin, wherever there was active mining, there were ideal conditions for creating underground storage facilities. Abandoned mines, old ore mines, natural caves, all of these could serve as ready-made shelters for treasures. But was the mining industry used as a cover for large-scale work to create hiding places? The areas around the largest hydraulic structures of the USSR are of particular interest. The construction of canals, reservoirs, and hydroelectric power plants was accompanied by large-scale earthworks, during which additional underground structures could be created unnoticed. Moreover, the change in the landscape after the completion of construction served as a natural camouflage for the entrances to the caches. Were some of the grandiose construction projects of communism also a cover for the creation of secret storage facilities? Border areas represent a special category of potential hiding places. On the one hand, proximity to the state border created additional risks. On the other hand, it was here that special caches could be created to finance underground work in the event of enemy occupation of the territory. Documents confirm that there was indeed a network of caches along the western borders of the USSR intended to support the partisan movement. But were these storage facilities limited to weapons and equipment, or did they also hide financial reserves? An interesting category is made up of places associated with Russia's religious history. Abandoned monasteries, ruined temples, ancient shrines. Such objects attracted the attention of cache creators for several reasons. First, they were often located in remote areas. Second, they had ready-made underground infrastructure in the form of basements and catacombs. Third, the local population traditionally avoided visiting desecrated shrines. Did some of the ruined monasteries become repositories for completely different treasures? The material wealth of the new authorities? Transportation routes also did not escape the attention of the organizers of secret caches. The construction of railways, especially in remote regions, was accompanied by the creation of numerous technical structures, tunnels, bridges, and embankments. Many of these structures had hidden cavities that could be used to store caches. Moreover, the railway network provided convenient logistics for delivering materials to the most remote corners of the country. Was it not used systematically to create an extensive network of storage facilities? Scientific and defense. Facilities represent another intriguing category of potential hiding places. Closed cities, secret testing grounds, research centers. All of these were areas with special regimes where any work could be carried out without the risk of outside interference. Archival documents contain hints that some scientific institutions also served as storage facilities for top-secret materials. But what exactly was hidden there? Modern researchers note that many of the potential locations for these caches remain largely unexplored. The vast territories of Siberia and the Far East, the Arctic archipelagos, the mountainous regions of Central Asia, traces of Soviet treasures could be hidden anywhere. But is the modern state ready for a systematic search for these caches? And what should be done with the riches found? Consider them a historical find or state property. The events of the late 1980s and early 1990s radically changed the fate of the entire system of Soviet caches. The collapse of the Union was so rapid that many of those who knew about the existence of secret caches simply did not have time to pass on information about them to the new authorities or to use it themselves. As a result, a significant part of the treasure maps was irretrievably lost, and the caches themselves turned into real, lost treasures. But where exactly did these priceless documents go? And is there any chance of recovering the lost information? The chaos that accompanied the last months of the USSR's existence led to many archives being abandoned. Documents that had been kept under the strictest secrecy for decades suddenly became accessible to anyone who had access to the office premises. According to eyewitness accounts, in some institutions, employees carried out bags full of papers, among which could well have been maps of hiding places. Some of these documents were simply destroyed as unnecessary waste paper. But what happened to the rest? The situation was particularly dramatic in the republics that had declared their independence. Local authorities sought to get rid of anything that reminded them of the Soviet past as quickly as possible. As a result, many archives were either transferred to Moscow or simply burned. However, there is evidence that some of the documents ended up in private hands, usually former party workers or Secret Service employees who understood the potential value of such information. Did the treasure maps become commodities on the black market for historical documents? Interesting details can be found in the memoirs of Russian Secret Service employees who were involved in inventorying the KGB's legacy in the early 1990s. They report that a significant portion of the archives related to the caches were found in a state of complete disarray. Many folders were incomplete, with the most important documents clearly having been removed. It seemed as if someone had deliberately cleaned out the archives, leaving only secondary materials. The role of the new independent states in the fate of the Soviet caches remains unclear. Formally, all material assets located on the territory of the former Soviet republics were to be transferred to their governments. However, in practice, not all countries were interested in searching for Soviet caches. Moreover, there are suspicions that in some cases, information about the caches was used for the personal interests of representatives of the new elites. Caches located outside the former USSR constitute a special category. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, access to them became virtually impossible. Caches in Eastern Europe were formally supposed to be transferred to the control of local authorities, but in practice, many of them remained unclaimed. Does modern Russia have legal grounds to claim these treasures, and are European countries prepared for such demands? The commercialization of information about the caches began almost immediately after the collapse of the USSR. Numerous consultants and experts appeared, claiming to have authentic maps of Soviet treasures. Some of them may have had access to authentic documents, but most offered the commercialization of information about hidden treasures began almost immediately after the collapse of the USSR. Numerous consultants and experts appeared, claiming to have authentic maps of Soviet treasures. Some of them may have actually had access to authentic documents, but most offered forgeries of varying quality. The treasure map market flourished, attracting both naive amateurs and serious investors willing to invest significant funds in the search for Soviet gold. The legal situation with the caches turned out to be extremely complicated. As the successor to the USSR, the Russian Federation theoretically had rights to all Soviet assets, but in practice, it was almost impossible to prove ownership of specific caches. The lack of documentary evidence, the disputed status of the territories where the caches could have been located, and international legal conflicts turned the question of Soviet treasures into a real legal nightmare. What if some of the caches have already been found and used, but the information about this is being carefully concealed? Western special services played an interesting role in the fate of the maps. According to some reports, the CIA and other intelligence agencies actively bought information about Soviet caches from former KGB employees and party officials. The goal was not so much to get hold of the treasures as to obtain data on the scale and methods of the Soviet strategic reserve system. But it cannot be ruled out that some of this information was used for practical purposes, to search for and seize the most valuable caches. The role of organized crime in the treasure map story should not be underestimated either. In the turbulent 1990s, criminal groups were actively interested in any information that could bring quick profits. Former KGB agents and party officials who knew about the caches often became the targets of authorities. Some of them, under pressure or for large sums of money, could pass valuable information into criminal hands. The technical aspects of searching for caches in the new conditions also underwent changes. Whereas previously access to caches was controlled by the state, now anyone with the relevant information could try their luck. Specialized groups of black archaeologists equipped with modern search equipment appeared. Many areas where caches were believed to be located were subjected to chaotic combing, which could lead to the destruction of important historical evidence. The international aspect of the problem added further complications. Caches created in the territory of the Warsaw Pact countries fell under the jurisdiction of independent states after the collapse of the socialist camp. Some of them were interested in finding Soviet treasures, while others preferred not to remember the dubious legacy. As a result, some of the international caches may have remained untouched simply because of a political unwillingness to search for them. Document flow related to the caches virtually ceased in the post-Soviet period. The new authorities either did not know about the existence of the secret caches or did not have the resources to search for them systematically. As a result, valuable information was scattered among a multitude of individuals, each of whom had only fragments of the overall picture. But are these fragments sufficient to reconstruct the complete scheme of Soviet treasures? When researching the archives of various departments of the former USSR, modern historians encounter a surprising phenomenon. Many documents that should contain information about strategic caches have strange gaps and blank spots. Entire pages have been cut out of. Folders, case numbers are missing from inventories, and some collections have disappeared without a trace. These gaps in the archives may be the result of either the systematic destruction of compromising documents or their removal by interested parties. But who did this and why? The situation with the archives of the USSR Ministry of Finance and the EE State Bank is particularly telling. These departments should have had the most complete information about strategic reserves and their location. However, a striking picture emerges when studying their collections. All documents dating from the 1930s to the 1950s and relating to special operations with currency reserves are either missing or represented only by file covers marked "Contents," removed. The situation with the archives of the military department is no less mysterious. Documents related to the evacuation of material assets during the Great Patriotic War have been preserved in an extremely fragmentary manner. Researchers note that the most detailed descriptions concern the evacuation of industrial equipment and cultural assets, but there is virtually no information about the movement of financial reserves. Is this selective preservation of documents accidental, or did someone deliberately remove precisely those materials that could indicate the location of the treasures? Interesting discoveries sometimes occur in the most unexpected places. For example, a folder with documents from 1947 was found in the archives of one of the regional executive committees, containing fragments of correspondence about preparing reserve sites for the placement of particularly important cargo. The RIKI letters mentioned specific geographical coordinates and the names of responsible persons, but most of the text was carefully blacked out with ink. What exactly were they trying to hide? Working with declassified KGB documents also brings unexpected discoveries. Some cases contain references to operations to ensure the safety of state assets, but the descriptions of these operations are missing. Instead, only the numbers of the orders and the dates of their execution remain. It seems that the most important information was removed from the archives even before they were officially declassified. A special category consists of documents that are formally present in the archives, but whose content raises serious doubts. These are maps and diagrams marking the locations of industrial waste burial sites, or temporary storage of construction materials. However, a detailed analysis of these documents reveals strange inconsistencies. The materials listed do not correspond to the industrial profile of the region, and the methods of their burial are more suitable for preserving valuables than for waste disposal. Could these documents be veiled maps of real hiding places? The digitization of archives, which began in the 2000s, has led to new discoveries. Modern technologies have made it possible to restore texts that were considered irretrievably lost. Fragments of the original information were found under layers of erasures and corrections. However, this same digitization has also created new problems. Some documents that were digitized at the beginning of the process subsequently disappeared from the databases without explanation. Is the removal of important information continuing even today? A comparative analysis of the archives of different departments reveals an interesting pattern. The higher the level of secrecy of an organization, the more blank spots there are in its documents. The Politburo archives contain a minimum of specific information about the hiding places. The KGB archives contain more, but with significant omissions, and the most complete information has been preserved in the documents of the technical services that were involved in the practical side of creating the hiding places. Modern researchers have developed several methods for working with incomplete archives, comparing fragmentary data from different sources, analyzing indirect references, and studying economic documents all allow us to partially restore lost information. But are these methods sufficient to create a complete picture of the Soviet cash system, or has key information been lost forever? Nowadays, conspiracy theories related to Soviet treasure maps have gained new momentum thanks to the Internet and the availability of previously classified information. Conspiracy theorists put forward the most daring versions of what lies behind the official history of Soviet hiding places. According to one of the most popular theories, the system of secret caches was much larger than is commonly believed and included not only material valuables, but also very special artifacts. But where is the line between reasonable assumptions and fantasy? And why do such theories resonate so strongly with the modern public? One of the most sensational versions concerns the so-called Golden Train. According to this theory, in the last months of the war, a train carrying treasures looted by the Nazis was secretly transported from Germany to the USSR. Officially, such an operation has never been acknowledged, but conspiracy theorists claim that the cargo was hidden in one of the Siberian caches and is still waiting for its moment. This version is allegedly confirmed by documents found mentioning trophy materials of special value. But how reliable are such finds? No less intriguing is the theory about the Stalin archives. According to its supporters, secret caches contain not only material wealth, but also documents that could radically change our understanding of the history of the USSR. These include correspondence with foreign leaders, plans for secret operations, and possibly even compromising materials on prominent Western figures. If such archives really exist, their publication could be the sensation of the century. But is anyone ready for such revelations? Technological conspiracy theories link Soviet caches to secret scientific developments. According to these versions, the caches may contain samples of advanced technologies that were ahead of their time, or even artifacts of extraterrestrial origin that were studied in secret laboratories of the USSR. Proponents of such theories cite circumstantial evidence of unusual materials found during the construction of the caches. But where do the facts end and speculation begin? Theories about the international scale of Soviet caches have become particularly popular. Conspiracy theorists claim that caches were created not only in the USSR and friendly countries, but even in enemy states. In their opinion, Soviet intelligence was so effective that it was able to create secret storage facilities in the US, the UK, and other capitalist countries. But was it really possible to carry out such operations during the Cold War? Religious and mystical theories link Soviet treasures to artifacts of the Orthodox Church and even more ancient relics. According to these versions, the caches may contain sacred objects confiscated during the struggle against religion, including icons of special power, relics of saints, and even legendary artifacts such as the Holy Grail or pieces of the life-giving cross. Such theories are especially popular among believers who see the search for treasures as an opportunity to return lost holy objects. Geopolitical conspiracy theories view Soviet caches as part of a long-term strategy for world domination. According to their supporters, the caches were created not only to protect against enemies, but also as a tool to influence international politics. The existence of secret financial reserves in various countries allegedly allowed the USSR to secretly finance revolutionary movements and bribe foreign politicians. But is there any documentary evidence of such activities? Modern conspiracy. Theorists actively use the internet to spread their theories. Specialized forums have appeared where alleged maps of hiding places are discussed. Found documents are analyzed, and search expeditions are coordinated. Some members of these communities claim to have authentic information about the location of the treasures, but it is extremely difficult to verify these claims. Critics of conspiracy theories point to their main weakness: the lack of convincing evidence. Most sensational discoveries turn out to be either fakes or the result of misinterpretation of documents. However, it is also impossible to completely reject all conspiracy theories. After all, the real history of Soviet caches is indeed full of gaps and contradictions that give rise to the most daring assumptions. The modern search for Soviet treasures has become a real industry, bringing together professional archaeologists, amateur enthusiasts, and commercial organizations. With the development of metal detection technology, ground-penetrating radar scanning, and satellite navigation, the chances of discovering long-lost caches have increased significantly. Every year, there are reports of new discoveries that may be linked to the Soviet system of secret caches. But how serious are these discoveries? And has the search for treasure become a way to make money from gullible adventure seekers? Professional search expeditions use the most modern equipment. Magnetometers can detect metal objects at depths of up to 5 meters. Ground-penetrating radar allows the structure of the soil to be examined without excavation. And satellite images help to identify anomalies in the landscape that may indicate man-made structures. Technological progress makes searches more effective, but at the same time attracts the attention of black diggers who can destroy important archaeological sites. The legal side of modern searches is extremely complex. In Russia, all archaeological finds formally belong to the state, and a special permit is required to conduct excavations. However, in practice, it is impossible to control the entire territory of the country, and many searches are conducted semi-legally or completely illegally. The situation is complicated by the fact that Soviet caches may not fall under the definition of archaeological monuments, which creates legal uncertainty. The most promising regions for searches are considered to be areas where large-scale earthworks were carried out during the Soviet era. These are areas where canals, reservoirs, and large industrial facilities were built. Particular attention is drawn to places where archival documents contain vague references to special works or the placement of strategic facilities. However, many of these areas are now built up or used for economic purposes, which makes the search much more difficult. Research in areas of former special facilities has yielded interesting results. Closed cities, military training grounds, and secret scientific centers are all places where particularly important caches could have been created. After many facilities were declassified, it became possible to conduct search operations there, but special permission from the military authorities is required. Some finds in such places do indeed indicate the existence of hidden caches, but their contents often disappoint seekers. International cooperation in the search for Soviet treasures is developing slowly. The countries of the former Warsaw Pact have different attitudes toward the possibility of Soviet caches existing on their territory. Some are interested in the search and are willing to cooperate with Russian researchers, while others prefer to resolve these issues independently. Political differences often hinder the effective exchange of information, which reduces the chances of a successful search. The commercial component of modern searches attracts both serious investors and fraudsters. Companies have appeared offering participation in guaranteed profitable expeditions in search of Soviet gold. Most of these offers turn out to be scams, but sometimes there are serious projects based on real archival data. The psychological aspect of modern searches also deserves attention. For many people, treasure hunting becomes a way to touch history and feel like pioneers. Even if the specific finds turn out to be insignificant, the search process itself brings satisfaction and helps to better understand the country's past. The scientific value of search work often exceeds its commercial return. Even unsuccessful attempts to find caches provide important information about Soviet history, help clarify the details of historical events, and sometimes lead to the discovery of other archaeological sites. In this sense, modern searches for Soviet treasures can be seen as a contribution to the study of national history, regardless of whether real treasures are found. The question of whether Soviet caches could have survived to this day remains one of the most intriguing aspects of this whole story. Almost a century has passed since some of these caches were created, and during that time, many changes have occurred that could have affected their condition. Climatic conditions, geological processes, human activity. All these factors could either destroy the caches or ensure their inviolability. But what conditions are necessary for the long-term preservation of hidden treasures? And where are they most likely to be found? The technical requirements for the creation of Soviet caches initially provided for their long-term storage. The use of lead containers, airtight packaging, and special chemical compounds to protect against corrosion were all designed to last for decades. Moreover, many caches were created in geologically stable conditions, in rock formations, on high ground, far from groundwater. Theoretically, such caches can be preserved indefinitely. But how does this theory correspond to practice? The climatic zones of the USSR provided different opportunities for the preservation of caches. The Arctic regions, with their permafrost, provided ideal conditions for the preservation of any materials. Dry steppe and desert regions also contributed to long-term storage. However, humid tropical zones and areas with active seismic activity posed a serious threat to the caches. So, it turns out that the geography of the hiding places largely determined their fate. Archaeology provides interesting examples. Finds that have lain in the ground for centuries and millennia prove the fundamental possibility of long-term preservation of metal objects. Ancient coins, jewelry, weapons, all of these are regularly found in excellent condition. Soviet caches were created using more advanced technologies than ancient treasures, so their chances of preservation should be even higher. The human factor poses the greatest threat to the preservation of caches. Construction, agricultural activities, and the laying of communications. All these processes could lead to the accidental discovery and destruction of caches. Caches located near settlements, which over time expanded and absorbed previously deserted territories, proved to be particularly vulnerable. However, many caches were created in remote areas where such threats were minimal. Natural disasters could also affect the fate of the caches. Floods, landslides, earthquakes, and forest fires, all these phenomena can change the landscape beyond recognition. Large-scale hydroengineering projects of the Soviet era were particularly dangerous. The creation of reservoirs could lead to the flooding of entire regions with all the caches located there. On the other hand, some natural processes could further protect the caches, for example, by filling in their entrances as a result of erosion. Modern technologies make it possible to assess the condition of underground objects without opening them. Ground-penetrating radar scanning shows that many metal objects buried during the Soviet era have retained their structure. This gives reason to believe that professionally created hiding places are highly likely to have survived to the present day in good condition. Biological factors represent a separate category of threats. Tree roots can destroy the protective coatings of containers, rodents can penetrate leaky storage facilities, and microorganisms can cause metal corrosion. However, Soviet engineers took these risks into account and applied appropriate protective measures. Biocides, anti-corrosion coatings, and durable materials were all designed to ensure the preservation of the contents of the caches. Statistics on accidental finds confirm the possibility of preserving Soviet caches. There are regular reports of buried containers being discovered with documents, money, or valuable items from the Soviet era. Although most of these finds are not related to state caches, they prove that, when properly organized, caches can be preserved for a very long time, perhaps much longer than originally planned. The role of treasure maps in shaping the historical memory of the Soviet Union goes far beyond a simple interest in hidden riches. These mysterious diagrams have become a symbol of an entire era when the state lived in constant anticipation of disaster and prepared for the most extreme scenarios. The history of Soviet hiding places reflects the profound characteristics of a political system that simultaneously demonstrated confidence in the future and prepared for the worst. But isn't this contradiction the key to understanding the entire history of the Soviet Union? The mythology that has developed around Soviet treasures serves an important cultural function. It allows modern people to take a fresh look at the past, to see the hidden motives and secret plans of the country's leadership behind the official version of history. The search for hidden caches becomes a form of archaeology of power, an attempt to understand how the Soviet system functioned and what fears drove its creators. The phenomenon of Soviet treasure maps is closely linked to the peculiarities of the national character, the desire to create a nest egg for a rainy day, to hide something valuable from prying eyes. All this is deeply rooted in Russian culture. State caches can be seen as a projection of this national archetype onto the level of the entire country, as an attempt to ensure not an individual family, but the entire Soviet project. Conspiracy theories associated with secret caches reflect society's distrust of official versions of history. People intuitively feel that behind the grand declarations lay a more complex reality, in which there was room for both secret plans and hidden riches. The search for treasure becomes a symbolic way of getting to the truth about the past, which the authorities preferred not to publicize. The educational value of research into Soviet secret caches cannot be overestimated. Studying this topic forces us to delve deeper into the economic history of the USSR, understand the peculiarities of the functioning of the party-state apparatus, and analyze the international situation during different periods. As a result, a more comprehensive and nuanced understanding of the Soviet era is formed, free from the extremes of both apologetics and demonization. The psychological aspect of interest in Soviet treasures also deserves attention. For many people, this topic becomes a way to cope with the trauma of historical rupture, an attempt to find a material embodiment of a bygone era. Hiding places appear to be a kind of time machine, capable of physically connecting the past and the present through specific objects. The international dimension of the topic of Soviet treasures influences the formation of Russia's image in global public opinion. Stories about secret stashes reinforce stereotypes about the mysterious Russian soul and special methods of conducting politics. On the one hand, this can damage the country's reputation, but on the other, It creates an aura of mystery, which is itself a form of cultural capital. The commercialization of the topic of Soviet treasures has led to the emergence of an entire entertainment industry. Books, films, computer games, tourist routes, all of these exploit the popularity of the topic. However, such commercialization can lead to the simplification and mythologization of history, turning serious historical issues into entertainment content. The ethical aspects of searching for Soviet treasures also need to be considered. Does the current generation have the right to search for and appropriate the wealth created by the labor of previous generations? How do the interests of treasure hunters, the state, science, and ordinary citizens on whose land the caches may be located relate to each other? The influence of digital technologies on the development of the topic of Soviet treasures is evident in the emergence of virtual communities of treasure hunters, online archives, and specialized databases. The Internet has made information available that was previously known only to a narrow circle of specialists, but at the same time has contributed to the spread of unreliable information and conspiracy theories. The future of research into Soviet hiding places largely depends on the development of search technologies and changes in legal regulations. Perhaps in a few decades we will get a definitive answer to the question of the existence and location of Soviet treasures. But is society ready for such a truth about its past?